If your podcast is only growing because you're paying for ads, you have a problem.
And if you're not sure whether ads are the only reason your show is growing, there's a simple test. Turn the ads off and see what happens. If your views or downloads crater, your numbers were being artificially inflated. The ads weren't building long-term listeners.
Want more proof? Look at the engagement on your advertised episodes. If the ads aren't working properly, you'll see little to no comments and only a handful of likes. That's a huge red flag for sponsors. They don't just care about reach, they care about engagement. Without it, your audience won't convert into customers.
The same goes for you. You don't need the illusion of growth, you need a real audience.
So today, we're breaking down 4 ways we help our clients grow organically, from incredibly simple tactics to full-on 4D chess.
Welcome to Podcast Support, the show where we tackle the questions every podcaster needs answered to grow a successful show. Whether you're just starting out or scaling an existing audience, we break down the roadblocks, share practical strategies, and give you step-by-step answers so you can spend less time guessing and more time building the podcast you want.
Thank you for contacting Podcast Support.
So first up, and probably the most straightforward, Michael, we have increased your click-through rate and average percentage viewed. Now, both of these are hugely important, and they're ones that sometimes can be overlooked because people, are getting too caught up with actually making the content, and they're not necessarily able to focus as much on strategy. So making sure that you're achieving both of these is super important.
Yeah, especially if you want growth, the algorithm is looking at these 2 statistics. If you can get your click-through rate up and your average percentage viewed up, the algorithm will spread you far and wide.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the main things that people can be doing and thinking about to make sure that they're growing these 2 statistics?
So click-through rate definitely comes down to mostly your title and thumbnail and making sure that you have a really strong promise of value in there. And also that your title and thumbnail build off of one another. You never want to, how sometimes you see podcasts out there where they have the same exact words in their title that they also have in their thumbnail, and you go, that was a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, I think that is a really, really important step. And when you're making sure that you're doing these thumbnails and titles right, you want to be testing them. And that doesn't necessarily, because, early on, it's probably not the best move that you're doing like ABC testing on your titles and thumbnails, because you're just not getting the amount of data that you need to actually make a decision off of that. And you're not getting the views from YouTube that you would need to really see that tell you anything of value.
Yeah, you really want to be waiting until you're getting at least 5,000 to 10,000 views before you start doing A/B testing with thumbnails?
Yeah, but I do think that, you want to be trying out different styles and stuff. And that might be that you do a specific style for 5 episodes and then you switch it up just a little bit. And you want to be making minor improvements or making little differences to see, hey, how does that work versus another one? And you want to look at it on multi-episode views.
That's actually a really important element of doing these tests, is that you don't want to just suddenly change your entire thumbnail style.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you actually decide, okay, for the last 2 or 3 months, we've been posting this exact thumbnail. Now, for the next month, we're going to change this element, or maybe these 2 elements. We're going to change our font, or we're going to change the size of the faces in it. And then for a full month, commit to that change and see what happened.
Yep.
And then you can then make that decision of, okay, we like that, we're going to keep that, now let's change something else. Because if you just immediately say, okay, here we go, let's revamp the thumbnails, and you have a whole new thumbnail and it does slightly better, now you're like, well, wait a second, what lessons do I take away from that?
Yeah, it's not as helpful. You're not able to draw as many conclusions. The same goes for titles. You don't necessarily want to be changing up your whole title structure all the time. Instead, you want to make sure that you just have the key components of it, that you're creating a question that the person needs answered, those types of things, that you're playing with the thumbnail. So you don't really want to be switching that up too much either. You want to just be making micro improvements to it, and also just trusting in that, once you have something that you think is right, going with it for long enough that you can actually prove whether or not it's helping you.
Trying to make a change every single week that you put out your podcast is going to inevitably just lead to you having no idea what's working or not working.
Yeah. Okay.
One other thing about titles and thumbnails is that we mentioned earlier the fact that you want your thumbnail to build off of your title. And what we mean by that is that when someone reads your title, you want them to be interested. And you want them to, in their head, go, okay, yeah, that's something that relates to me. And then when they look at your thumbnail after that, you want them to suddenly have some extra piece of context that makes them go, oh, I hadn't even thought about it like that. And feel like a compulsion to need to click. Or, wait a second, how does that relate to that? How does that relate to this topic? And I need to have that answer. I've now opened up this curiosity gap, and there's a loop that has to be closed, and the only way to close it is by clicking on that thumbnail. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to get the highest click-through rate on YouTube. Your click-through rates are always going to be subpar if you're not getting people to have that feeling.
Yeah, and that, having that curiosity gap, that kind of really brings us in nicely to what's next, which is hooking your audience. And that comes from teasers and making sure that you are providing an answer to that curiosity gap and then providing new curiosity gaps within that first 15 to 30 seconds of the video. So one of the best things that we can do when we're trying to close curiosity gaps is that the thumbnail provided the question, and then we actually do provide valuable insight and an actual conclusion to it. We want to answer that question. We don't want to just, continue to provide just another teaser or question. We want to actually make sure that we provide value in that first 30 seconds.
Yeah, just like the thumbnail has to build off of the title, the teaser has to build off of the thumbnail. Because if you, in your thumbnail, raise a question and then the very first thing in the teaser is just, hey, here's that same question, you have not in any way forwarded me or pulled me further into this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. The way I like to think about it is, and we're talking about podcasting here, but I think oftentimes you can learn a lot from YouTubers. I think that sometimes they're more ahead than podcasters are. And so when you look at something like Will Tennyson, I always like to look at his for kind of inspiration on this, is you'll see, that he goes to the most overweight county in the United States. And then that's like the big thing on his title and thumbnail. And then you click on the video and immediately you're seeing him like interacting with somebody who's having an unhealthy diet or something like that like immediately provides more insight into it. And then you get like that big boom teaser moment that's, whatever else comes next that brings up a new question.
Bringing up that new question is definitely the most important thing, because the teaser has to propel the audience further forward into the episode. If you answer the question and then you say, all right, now let's keep talking about that, you've lost your audience immediately. It has to be you answer the question, and now just like we made that feeling earlier with the thumbnail of, oh, I hadn't even thought about how that relates to this topic, you need to throw that in there too. Like with Will Tennyson, if he brings in the fact that, this is the most unhealthy county in America, he's going to then throw in that like there's some sort of like secret like corporate interest going on here. And suddenly you're like, oh my God, wait, there's like a conspiracy behind it too? Whoa.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, one of the things that I think is worth asking here is, how important do you think the editing is within these teasers?
I think that editing is a really nice, like, little bit of extra something to throw on to add flavor to it, to, communicate some extra messaging to your audience. But in the end, what the audience cares about is the story and the context. Mm-hmm. And if you can edit it in a way that you just very succinctly and clearly give the audience what they want, you've succeeded. Mm-hmm. If you then can, take the extra time or put in the extra money to make it look cinematic and like really like go whole hog with it, it might have some better results. But yeah. I think that overall the diminishing returns come in quickly when you get into like really high-end editing. It's about the core concepts and the core messaging. That's what's going to really make the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the final things is that once you've done this teaser and you're trying to maintain, because I think the hook even goes into once the episode fully starts. Mm-hmm. And what I'd say with that is avoiding intros like, hello, I'm this, welcome to this channel. I think oftentimes can be a huge boon. So I'm curious what your answer is that we have a welcome to podcast support, and we do have that in our videos. So what's your response to that? What's your reaction?
I think there's a big difference between what like a standard podcast intro is and what we do in our show and what a lot of shows do, which is give a quick pitch of the show.
Yeah.
If you give a quick pitch of the show, you're telling new viewers exactly what they're going to, like, the pitch of your show should tell new viewers exactly what they're going to get out of continuing to listen to your show and what value you're here to provide and what your expertise is. I think what a lot of people do is, hi, welcome to the podcast. I'm so-and-so. And, I was thinking about this, and they just sort of ramble in the first 30 seconds, or they just sort of like banter with their co-host and don't go anywhere with it. And that, I think, is where the problem is. Not just getting straight into the meat of the episode, but when we give our intro, the quick 30 seconds at the beginning of our podcast, we're adding context by talking about our expertise and talking about why we're talking about this.
Yeah. I think back to the Nerdist podcast. Did you ever listen to that?
I actually didn't.
Okay. So that podcast, they would start recording without ever telling the guest that they're recording. And so frequently you would hear the guest go, okay, so when are we starting? And they would be like, oh, no, we've already started. And it's because they would just jump in with the conversation. They wouldn't do some introduction. And every time that led to a much more gripping episode, because immediately you're already in the conversation, you're already hearing new things versus hearing things that you already know, like the background of this guest or something.
And also when you actually tell them, hey, we're going to start now, usually, especially guests who are not as familiar with being on podcasts, guests want to start at the very, very, very beginning of everything. They're like, oh, well, let me tell you about like when I first went to college and got interested in this. But that's not why the audience is listening. They don't want to know this person's college story. They want to know why this topic matters to them and what information you can give them right now.
So now that we've hooked people into watching the video, it brings us to our third one, which is holding people's attention. And you often hear the term attention economy thrown around. So, when we're trying to think of how we keep people engaged and continuing to listen, one of the things that comes to my mind is going down rabbit holes. Mm-hmm. Which is to say, not just rapid fire asking questions to a guest, but instead following where the conversation naturally goes. And you often find much more interesting and valuable things because you get away from the surface level answers that people have heard on a million other podcasts.
I totally agree with that. One of my biggest pet peeves when I'm listening to an interview podcast is when they just ask a question, the guest answers, and then they just ask another question. Yeah. Because it doesn't feel like it's a discussion in there. Because like when you and I talk in real life, we're constantly like, wait, what do you mean that happened? Like, wait, they said what? Yeah. And we delve deeper because we're really interested. And we get more interesting information out of each other in those conversations.
Yeah, 100%.
Because we do that. And as a podcast host, you have to do the same thing. And like, it's like being a journalist. You have to dig deeper and deeper than the surface.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that comes down to a comfortability with, going in the unknown direction, kind of swimming in that lane of I'm going to be okay not necessarily knowing where every part of this goes, which can be hard for people who are doing podcasts because I think oftentimes, kind of surprisingly, people who are type A are drawn to podcasting. And so it's hard to relinquish that control, but doing that leads to such better reactions from your guests. It leads to a better result overall. It leads to just better information too.
I totally agree with that.
So once we've kind of problem solved that, I think there is though a hard thing for podcasters, which is like, okay, but how do I actually hold people's attention? Like, what do I do? Do I need to act wacky? Do I need to do some big thing to get people's attention? Like, how do I actually make sure that people continue to watch and learn or, want to experience my podcast?
I think that the answer to that is it comes down to two things. Number one, you have to put on a good performance.
Yeah.
You have to be entertaining. You have to be engaging. It has to seem like you actually care. Because if you seem bored, why should your audience not be bored?
Yeah, for sure.
Because there's a lot of podcast hosts that act bored on their shows, and I never understand that.
Yeah.
And then I think it comes from a thing of not wanting to like seem like you're trying too hard. Like it wants to seem like you're like aloof and like above it. But like, why are you making a show where you're deep diving into things if you aren't actually interested? And then the other thing is using hooks more than once. Don't just hook people at the very beginning of your episode. Hook people after the first like segment of interview questions again. Hook them halfway through to make sure that they know what's coming up later on in the podcast. Constantly promise what value is coming up next so that they always have a reason to keep watching. Because if you hook them in the beginning and give them more context and then answer that context, but there's still 45 more minutes of your podcast left, just because you've, proven so far that you're trustworthy, that you've given them good stuff so far, doesn't mean they know why they need to keep watching. So you need to keep telling them, this is why you need to keep watching for this next section. This is why you need to keep watching for this next section.
Yeah.
And this, at the end of the podcast, is why you need to make sure you tune in next week.
One of the things that I keep coming back to and that I've been thinking about a lot is within that performance. So I listen to, a lot of podcasts every week and a lot of different new podcasts. And one of the things that I kind of come back to is people being afraid to perform and to actually put themselves out there in a way that, I think people get afraid of coming across as inauthentic. Mm-hmm. But what people, I think, sometimes view authentic as is bored or reserved.
Yeah. I think they're afraid that they're like going to come across as like a bad actor or something.
Yeah, or wacky, any of those types of like negative phrases.
God forbid you ever come across as wacky.
That's
a brand killer.
Yeah. So, but genuinely, I think that, people kind of get stopped because of that. And what I would say is when you are in a medium like podcasting, where it's a long form thing, where you're asking people to listen to you for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, 2 hours, you have to be interesting. And, you might have some people, like, I think people see Joe Rogan and you see somebody who a good amount of the time is sort of talking like this and, kind of like this and stuff. But Joe Rogan's one of one. And he also didn't start out doing that. He didn't start out with a podcast, even. He started out on television as an actor and a host.
I will also say Joe Rogan's got range.
Yeah.
Because Joe Rogan, when he gets into it, gets into it.
Yeah. No, 100%. And like that type of flow is something that I think people find interesting about watching his channel and stuff. So I think that we've all got to take a lesson of like, you actually do have to come to the table with excitement, with passion, and trying to learn how you can improve your performance, because there has to be a little bit of... I remember back in the day I did commercial acting, and I was talking to this commercial director, and she was, leading this class, and she was talking about how for commercials, actors, when they are there and, even for this one, like it was like, oh, you're sad. You're a sad person because I can't remember what it was. Maybe your backpack just broke. I don't know. So your backpack
and your book
just
spilled
broke,
all over the floor.
and it's like the worst day of your life. You're so sad. But when you're a commercial actor, even at your saddest, it has to be your best day of ever being sad. Like you still have to be like, wow, this is the worst, but I look great. I feel great. I'm just waiting for that product to come and save my life. And that's kind of how podcasting has to be. Even if, you're like feeling nervous, if you're feeling not great or something, you have to find that in yourself to still be present and be passionate in the moment. And you have to be able to like rely on that. And that's something that you have to practice within your performance.
That makes total sense. I definitely wish that my life was like a commercial character.
We all do.
That I just could constantly.
I don't know, man, because then you're up on your highs and lows.
but it's such a small high and low.
Yeah.
It's all above this baseline of awesome.
I don't think that's true. I think it's small lows, really extreme highs. Really extreme highs.
Just up to euphoric highs.
If you're bathing in the woods, like just in a random tub, that's an extreme high.
It's funny that I don't know what commercial you're talking about, but I can vividly imagine
That's every pill ad out there. They always have like an older person bathing in the woods.
Bathing in the woods?
Yeah.
I
watch.
I definitely thought this was going to be like a shampoo commercial.
No. Pills. Pills, baby. All right, so the fourth one is how to find ways to reach your audience outside of YouTube and podcast platforms. And this one is the one where you have to put in that extra bit of work. And I think that this is where, that little bit of burnout can creep in, is like you're thinking about, okay, I'm already making sure that this damn podcast records every week. I'm making sure that I have new guests for it. I'm making sure that I have teasers and thumbnails and hooks and every other thing. I'm already doing all of this stuff. What do you mean that I have to do outside marketing than just these platforms?
There is always more.
And the reality is that this is hard. That there's no easy button on this part, because the more effort you put into engaging with your audience and moving them off platforms like this to, other platforms or in person or things like that, the more you can maximize your revenue, the more that you can maximize your engagement with them, the more that you can do all of these really cool things. And it's the things that take you from being, $10,000 to $50,000 per year income to $100,000, $1 million, $10 million.
Yep.
These are the things that really make those big differences. So some of the ways that I think about that you can reach out to people outside is you got newsletters, you've got lead magnets, you've got live events, you have other platforms like Skool or Patreon. You've got those types of things. What other things am I missing?
And of course, you've got social media. You've got Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, X.
Sure. Yeah.
Not one that I use, but
yeah, you have all of these different things that you could be tackling. And so, what do you think about when we're talking with our own clients? What type of advice do you give them on which ones to focus on?
So what I say to clients is that we want to be focusing on the platforms that have the strongest algorithms that can put your content in front of new audience members. Because when you're looking for growth, it's really hard to grow a podcast when you are just posting on podcast platforms. Because podcast platforms do not have do not have an algorithm of their own. You post it, it's out there, and now you're either on a top 10 list or a top 100 list, or someone subscribed to you, and that's how people find your podcast. And if you are a new podcast, it's not going to recommend you to anyone. It doesn't know who your listeners should be. You're not going to be on any lists, so your podcast is going to stay totally stagnant. But if you post podcast clips on Instagram and TikTok, and you get thousands of views on those, and people get more interested in your show from those clips, you can then drive traffic to your main podcast, and now you can grow your podcast by using Instagram and TikTok algorithms. And also, YouTube has a great algorithm as well, and there's a lot of ways you can grow your podcast on YouTube, and you can post on YouTube Shorts as well.
Yeah, 100%. And so that's the platforms. I think that there is a lot of opportunity within social media.
I think people need to be posting clips every day.
Yeah, I think that.
I heard a really good
Okay.
example of what TikTok is the other day. Someone was explaining basically that every time that you post on TikTok, you're like buying a lottery ticket. And like, why would you? And like, there's no detriment on TikTok to not posting every single day. So why would you not be buying a lottery ticket for free every single? And all the lottery ticket costs is the effort of putting that post up.
Yeah.
So why would you not be buying a lottery ticket every single day?
No, I think that's super smart. I think that posting is hugely important, and I think that you can get a ton out of it. So beyond social media, though, because I want to make sure that we talk about some of these other ways that we can engage, because I do believe heavily that we're getting more and more into a place where you need to be finding people outside of just these digital areas.
And you want to make sure that also you're not entirely reliant on their algorithms and what they're doing, because YouTube and TikTok and all those platforms can change their algorithms in a heartbeat, can change what they want to promote, can change how the whole system works, and suddenly you're totally beholden to whatever decisions they make.
Yeah, I mean, if you like, as a cautionary tale, you look at how websites are performing now that Google has put in all of these AI features and everything, and suddenly they're getting way less traffic, they're getting less monetization, they're getting all of this stuff taken away from them, and it's because they had an over reliance. And I hate to, it's not necessarily only their fault, but because like Google is obviously plays a part in this, but they did rely and trust in Google to maintain the way that it has been. And clearly that's not the case anymore, and everything has shifted, and they are paying a huge price for that.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that you are not paying that price, that you have your own platforms, you have your own ways to interact with people. That can be merchandise, that can be live events. I think live events are blowing up. They're becoming more and more of a thing. You just hear literally any podcast, you just hear, oh, come to my live show, it's coming up soon. And like
every TikToker also has a live show coming up soon.
It's constant at this point, but I think it's because you can make a lot more from that and it can be a lot more stable than if you have exclusively your revenue coming from ad sales on these platforms.
It's also just a really good way to connect with people. Like every time that I've seen a live show from an internet performer, I have definitely felt like, okay, now I feel like I know this person even better. Like they're an actual human being that I've seen now, and not just a face on a screen.
Yeah, 100%.
They're 3-dimensional.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's mind blowing.
I mean, I thought kind of everybody was Paper Mario style, but apparently not. So then the final one is, platforms like Skool or Patreon, and those I think are really valuable ways to maintain a relationship. They are also, I think, scary traps if you're not being really strategic about them, and if you don't sort of create them at the right time. I think that sometimes people create them a little too early.
Well, if you create your Patreon really early in your journey, and you have like really big promises that you make to people, and one person signs up for it, you have to deliver those really big promises every single week for that one person who signed up for your Patreon.
Yeah. So I think that is, you have to temper your expectations, and you have to make sure that if you're going to promise those types of things, which I just wouldn't promise out of the gate, I think that, you should make sure that you have things that are achievable, that you might provide to people. But honestly, I think that what you could do is create a wait list. That is one way to, when you're earlier on, make sure that you actually are building sustainably, because so much of podcasting is unsustainable. So we have to fight that and make sure that we're growing sustainably.
Waitlists are such a good way to have data to be able to make decisions.
Yeah.
Of this is how many people are actively interested in this. That doesn't mean they're all convert once you actually start a Patreon, but at least that many people are interested in it.
Yep. So that is one way. The other one is, making sure that you're building out a newsletter or something like that that's a little bit more approachable on your end. You don't have to do any moderation. You don't have to do things like that. You don't have to create as much content. It's just, instead 700 words once a week or twice a month or something like that. And that's a way to get people in your ecosystem, get them paying attention and everything. You can find ways to make people engage with that newsletter so that you can see what engagement metrics are like. And then, you can transfer that to a Patreon or a Skool when the time's right. So that's 4 ways that you can grow organically outside of ads. I really recommend making sure that you are able to see outside of those ads that you're utilizing, are you actually growing? It's hugely important.
And thank you very much for watching, and we hope to see you next week on Podcast Support.
Thank you for contacting Podcast Support.